Welcome, listeners, to this audiobook 10 Lessons from Atomic Habits by James Clear. 1. Small habits can add up to make a big difference. Clear emphasizes the importance of small, incremental changes in behavior, which can add up to make a significant impact over time. 2. The power of compounding and habit formation. The book highlights the power of compounding and habit formation, where small, consistent changes can lead to significant improvements over time. 3. The 4 laws of behavior change. Clear outlines the 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. 4. The importance of tracking and monitoring habits. The book emphasizes the importance of tracking and monitoring habits in order to understand and change them. 5. How to create an implementation intention. Clear provides guidance on how to create an implementation intention, which involves specifying when and where a habit will be performed. 6. The role of identity in shaping habits. The book discusses the role of identity in shaping habits and how changing our habits can, in turn, change our identity. 7. How to avoid the 2-minute rule. Clear introduces the 2-minute rule, which involves making the first step of a habit so easy that it takes less than 2 minutes to do. 8. The importance of celebrating small wins. The book emphasizes the importance of celebrating small wins, which can help to build motivation and reinforce new habits. 9. How to create a habit stack. Clear provides guidance on how to create a habit stack, which involves building new habits onto existing ones. 10. The importance of being patient and persistent. The book concludes by emphasizing the importance of being patient and persistent when trying to change habits, as it can take time and effort to see results. Let's deep dive. 1. Small habits can add up to make a big difference. Clear emphasizes the importance of small, incremental changes in behavior, which can add up to make a significant impact over time. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast field, holding a single seed in your hand. It's tiny, insignificant on its own, barely worth a second glance. But what if you planted it? And then another, and another. Day after day, with just a little care, those seeds could grow into something extraordinary, a forest, a harvest, a legacy. That's the power of small habits. In Atomic Habits, James Clear takes us on a journey to uncover how the tiniest changes in our daily routines can compound into life-altering results. Today, we're diving deep into one of his core ideas. Small habits can add up to make a big difference. Let's explore how this works, with stories and examples straight from the book that bring this principle to life. Let's start with a story James Clear shares early on, one that sets the stage for everything else. Picture the British cycling team in the early 2000s. For nearly a century, they'd been a laughingstock in professional cycling. No Tour de France wins, no Olympic gold medals to speak of, just a legacy of mediocrity. Then, in 2003, a man named Dave Brailsford stepped in as their performance director. He didn't promise overnight miracles. Instead, he introduced a philosophy he called the aggregation of marginal gains. The idea? Improve every little thing by just 1%. The bikes, the training, the nutrition, even the pillows the riders slept on. Small tweaks, nothing flashy. At first, it didn't seem like much was happening. A lighter bike frame here, a better hand-washing routine to avoid colds there. But then, something incredible started to unfold. By 2008, the British team dominated the Beijing Olympics, winning 60% of the gold medals in cycling. A few years later, they won the Tour de France, not once, but 5 times in 6 years. All from those tiny 1% shifts. Clear uses this to show us that small habits don't just add up, they multiply. Like interest in a bank account, each little improvement builds on the last, creating a snowball effect that transforms everything. Now, let's bring this closer to home. Clear tells us about a concept he calls atomic habits. These are the smallest units of behavior, like brushing your teeth or putting on your shoes, that seem trivial in the moment. But over time, they're the building blocks of who you become. Take the story of a guy Clear mentions. Let's call him Mike, though the book doesn't name him. Mike was overweight, out of shape, and stuck in a rut. He didn't wake up one day and decide to run a marathon. Instead, he started with something absurdly small. He put on his running shoes every day. That's it. No running, no pressure, just shoes on, shoes off. Weeks passed, and that tiny habit grew. One day he stepped outside. Then he walked to the mailbox. Then around the block. Within a year, Mike had lost 100 pounds. Why? Because that one small habit, putting on his shoes, set off a chain reaction. Clear explains this with a simple truth. Habits are the entry point, not the end goal. Mike didn't need willpower to overhaul his life all at once. He just needed a starting point small enough to stick. And once it stuck, it compounded. This compounding effect is where the magic happens, And Clear gives us a vivid way to picture it. The idea of getting 1% better every day. If you improve by just 1% daily for a year, you don't end up 365% better. You end up nearly 38 times better. That's the math of exponential growth. But it works the other way too. Slack off by 1% each day, and by year's end, you're almost at zero. Clear illustrates this with a metaphor. Imagine a plane flying from Los Angeles to New York. If the pilot adjusts the course by just 3.5 degrees south at takeoff, you don't land in New York, you land in Washington, D.C. Tiny shifts in direction, over time, lead to wildly different destinations. Let's see this in action with another example from the book. Clear tells the story of a woman named Trish who wanted to eat healthier. She didn't start by throwing out all her junk food or swearing off sugar forever. Instead, she made one small rule. She'd eat a piece of fruit before any snack. At first, it was just an apple before her afternoon chips. But over weeks, that habit nudged her taste buds. She started craving fruit more, chips less. Months later, her diet had shifted, not through force, but through the gentle pull of a small, consistent choice. That's the beauty Clear wants us to see. Small habits don't demand perfection. They just need repetition. Now, you might be wondering, how do we make these small habits stick? Clear introduces a framework called the habit loop. Cue, craving, response, reward. Every habit follows this pattern. Let's look at an example he uses. A man trying to build a reading habit. The cue? He keeps a book on his pillow. The craving? He wants to unwind at night. The response? He reads a page. The reward? He feels relaxed and accomplished. At first, it's just one page. Tiny, right? But night after night, that page turns into a chapter, then a book. Clear says the key is to start so small you can't fail. One page isn't intimidating. It's doable. And once it's doable, it grows. Here's another gem from the book, the story of the 2-minute rule. Clear suggests that any habit can be scaled down to 2 minutes. Want to exercise? Start with 2 minutes of stretching. Want to write a novel? Write for 2 minutes. He shares the example of a woman who wanted to get fit but hated gyms. She committed to driving to the gym, staying for 2 minutes, then leaving. Sounds ridiculous, right? But after a week, she stayed for 5 minutes, then 10. Soon, she was working out for an hour. Why? Because showing up, however briefly, built the habit of showing up. Clear's point is clear. Don't aim for the finish line. Aim for the starting line. The rest follows. Let's zoom out for a moment. Clear ties all this together with a concept he calls systems over goals. Goals are great. They give you a target. But systems, the small habits you repeat, are what get you there. He uses the example of a basketball team. Their goal might be to win the championship. But their system? It's the daily drills, the free throws, the sprints. A team that obsesses over the system doesn't just win once, they win again and again. Compare that to someone who sets a goal to lose 20 pounds, but never builds a system. They might crash diet and succeed, temporarily. But without small habits, like drinking water instead of soda or walking daily, the weight creeps back. Systems, built on tiny habits, are the difference. One of my favorite examples from Atomic Habits is about a guy named Brian, who wanted to cut down on screen time. He didn't toss his phone out the window. Instead, he made a small tweak. He moved his phone charger from his bedroom to the kitchen. At night, he'd plug it in downstairs, leaving it out of reach. That tiny habit forced him to disconnect. Over weeks, he started reading more, sleeping better, even talking to his wife instead of scrolling. One small change, a phone in the kitchen, rippled into a better life. Clear loves these stories because they show how small habits don't just change actions, they change identities. Brian didn't just cut screen time. He became someone who valued presence. As we near the end, let's revisit that British cycling story. Dave Brailsford didn't transform the team with one big leap. He did it with hundreds of small ones. Clear wants us to see ourselves the same way. You don't need to overhaul your life today. You just need to start small, really small, and let time do the heavy lifting. Whether it's Mike with his running shoes, Trish with her fruit, or Brian with his charger, the message is the same. Small habits compound. They don't feel like much in the moment, but they're planting seeds. And those seeds? They grow into forests. So, what's your 1% today? Maybe it's drinking a glass of water first thing. Maybe it's writing one sentence. Whatever it is, start there. James Clear's Atomic Habits isn't about perfection. It's about progress. Small, steady, relentless progress. Because in the end, the biggest differences don't come from grand gestures. They come from the tiny habits we barely notice, until one day, we look back. 2. The power of compounding and habit formation. The book highlights the power of compounding and habit formation, where small, consistent changes can lead to significant improvements over time. Imagine you're holding a penny. Just 1 cent, small, shiny, and easy to overlook. Now, picture this. Every day, for a month, that penny doubles in value. Day 1, it's a penny. Day 2, 2 cents. Day 3, 4 cents. By day 31, that single penny has turned into over $10 million. That's the magic of compounding. A force so subtle you barely notice it at first, but so powerful it can transform everything over time. In Atomic Habits, James Clear takes this idea and applies it to the habits that shape our lives. Today, we're diving into one of his most compelling lessons, the power of compounding in habit formation. Through stories and examples from the book, we'll see how tiny actions, repeated consistently, don't just add up, they multiply into something extraordinary. Let's begin with a question Clear poses early in the book. Why do small habits matter? To answer it, he introduces us to a jaw-dropping example, the British cycling team. Back in the early 2000s, this team was a perennial underdog. No major wins, no glory, just a history of coming up short. Then, Dave Brailsford took over as performance director in 2003. He didn't promise a quick fix. Instead, he leaned on a concept he called the aggregation of marginal gains. His plan? Improve every little thing by just 1%. The team tweaked their bike seats for comfort, optimized their nutrition, even tested different fabrics for their uniforms. Small stuff. Nothing that screamed game changer on its own. At first, the results were quiet. A slightly faster recovery here, a bit less drag there. But those 1% gains didn't stay small, they compounded. By 2008, the British cyclists swept the Beijing Olympics, claiming 60% of the gold medals. Then, between 2012 and 2018, they won the Tour de France 5 times. Clear uses this to hammer home a truth. Small habits, repeated over time, don't just improve you linearly. They stack, layer upon layer, until the impact is exponential. That struggling team didn't transform overnight. It was the compound effect of tiny habits that turned them into champions. Now, let's shrink this down to something more personal. Clear loves to show how compounding works in everyday life, and he shares a story that sticks with you. Imagine a guy, let's call him Tom, who wanted to get in shape. Tom wasn't a gym rat. He was a couch potato, weighed down by years of inactivity. Big goals like run a marathon or lose 50 pounds felt impossible. So, he started smaller, way smaller. His habit? Walk to the end of his driveway and back. 2 minutes, tops. Day 1, he did it. Day 2, same thing. It was so easy he couldn't talk himself out of it. Here's where compounding kicked in. After a week, Tom felt a little spark. He walked to the corner, then around the block. A month in, he was walking a mile. By year's end, he'd shed 30 pounds and was jogging regularly. Clear explains why this worked. Tom's tiny habit didn't just build stamina, it built momentum. Each walk reinforced the last, like interest piling up in a savings account. The real change wasn't the distance he walked on day 1. It was the fact that he kept walking, day after day, letting the compound effect take over. Clear gives us a striking way to visualize this power, the 1% rule. Picture this. If you get 1% better every day for a year, you don't end up 365% better. You end up nearly 38 times better. That's not addition, that's multiplication. Flip it around, though, and it's just as stark. Decline by 1% daily, and by year's end, you're almost at nothing. Clear illustrates this with a metaphor I love, an ice cube sitting on a table. You start heating the room, degree by degree. At 26 degrees Fahrenheit, nothing happens. At 30 degrees Fahrenheit, still solid. But hit 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and suddenly, it melts. All those tiny increases in temperature compounded until they crossed a threshold, and everything changed. That's how habits work, Clear says. The early days feel like nothing's happening. You're stacking invisible wins. But keep going, and you hit a tipping point. Take the example of a woman Clear mentions who wanted to write a book. She started with 1 sentence a day, one measly sentence. For weeks, it felt pointless, just a few dozen words. But those sentences compounded. They became paragraphs, then pages. 2 years later, she had a finished manuscript. The power wasn't in the sentence itself. It was in the repetition, the way each day built on the last until the whole was far greater than the sum of its parts. Let's dig into another example Clear offers. The story of a man trying to quit smoking. He'd tried cold turkey, big, dramatic attempts that always fizzled out. This time, he took a different tack. His small habit? Every time he craved a cigarette, he'd chew a piece of gum instead. Day 1, he chewed a lot of gum. Day 2, a little less. The cravings didn't vanish overnight, but each piece of gum was a tiny victory, a step away from the pack. Over months, those steps compounded. The urge weakened, the gum habit strengthened, and eventually, he didn't need either. Clear points out the lesson. Small substitutions, repeated consistently, can unravel even the toughest habits. It's not about one heroic moment. It's about the slow, steady compound of choice. Here's where Clear gets really clever. He ties compounding to identity. Habits don't just change what you do, they change who you are. He tells the story of a woman, let's call her Sarah, who wanted to be a morning person. She was a night owl, always dragging herself out of bed. Her small habit? Set her alarm 5 minutes earlier each week. Week 1, she woke at 8:55 instead of 9 o'clock. Week 2, 8:50. Tiny, right? But those 5-minute shifts compounded. She started enjoying her quiet mornings, coffee, a book, a moment to breathe. 6 months later, she was up at 6:30, not because she forced it, but because she becomes someone who loved mornings. Clear says this is the real power of compounding. Every small habit casts a vote for the person you want to be, and over time, those votes add up to a landslide. Now, let's talk about patience, because compounding takes time. Clear uses a brilliant analogy, bamboo. When you plant bamboo, nothing seems to happen for years. Underground, it's spreading roots, building strength. Then, in its 5th year, it shoots up, sometimes 90 feet in 6 weeks. Habits are like that, he says. The early reps feel futile. You're laying roots no one sees. But stick with it, and the growth explodes. He shares the example of a guy who wanted to save money. His habit? Drop $1 in a jar each day. $1. It barely registered. But a year later, he had $365. 2 years, $730. 5 years in, with a little interest, it was thousands. The compound effect turned pocket change into real wealth, because he didn't stop. Clear also warns us about the flip side. Bad habits compound too. He tells the story of a woman who started skipping her morning workout just this once. 1 skip became 2. 2 became a week. By month's end, her gym bag was gathering dust. Each missed day didn't just set her back, it multiplied her inertia. Clear calls this the compound interest of self-destruction. Small slip-ups, repeated, don't stay small, they grow into ruts. The good news? You can reverse it. Start small again, and the positive compound takes over. That's the duality he wants us to grasp. Every habit, good or bad, is a seed that grows with time. Let's wrap up with one last story from the book, a personal favorite. Clear describes a friend who wanted to read more. His habit? 1 page a night. Not a chapter, not a book, 1 page. He'd crawl into bed, crack open a novel, and read 300 words. Some nights, he stopped there. Others, he kept going. But he never missed. A year later, he'd finished 20 books. Not because he read War and Peace in a sitting, but because 1 page compounded into thousands. Clear loves this example because it's so ordinary, yet so profound. It's not the size of the habit that matters. It's the consistency. That's where the power lies. As we close, think back to that penny doubling every day. Atomic Habits isn't about instant transformation. It's about trusting the slow burn of compounding. The British cyclists, Tom's walks, Sarah's mornings, they all started small. But they didn't stay small. James Clear's message is simple. Pick a tiny habit. Repeat it. Let time work its magic. Because the power of compounding isn't just in the action. It's in the patience to watch it grow. 3. The 4 laws of behavior change. Clear outlines the 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a new year, a new goal glimmering in your mind. Maybe it's to get fit, read more, or finally kick that pesky procrastination habit. You're fired up. Until a week later, when the gym bag's collecting dust and the book's still on the shelf. Sound familiar? In Atomic Habits, James Clear promises us a way out of that cycle. He doesn't just tell us to try harder. He hands us a blueprint, the 4 laws of behavior change. These 4 simple rules, make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying, are the secret sauce to building habits that stick. Today, we're diving into each law with stories and examples from the book that bring them to life. Ready to rewrite your habits? Let's get started. Law 1. Make it obvious. First up is the law that kicks everything off. Make it obvious. Clear says habits start with a cue, something that triggers your brain to act. If the cue's hidden, the habit never gets rolling. He tells the story of a guy, let's call him Jake, who wanted to drink more water. Jake's problem? His water bottle lived in a cabinet, out of sight, out of mind. So he applied the first law. He filled a few bottles and scattered them around. On his desk, by the couch, next to his bed. Suddenly, water wasn't a chore. It was right there, staring him in the face. Within weeks, he was guzzling H2O like a pro. Why? The cue was obvious. Clear takes this further with a concept called habit stacking. He shares the example of a woman who wanted to meditate. She didn't just say, I'll meditate sometime. She tied it to something she already did, brushing her teeth. Every morning, right after the toothbrush hit the sink, she'd sit for 1 minute of mindfulness. The brushing became her cue, making the habit impossible to miss. Clear's point: don't leave habits to chance. Put them in plain sight. Hitch them to your routines, and watch them take root. Law 2. Make it attractive. Next comes the second law: make it attractive. Clear knows we're not robots. We're drawn to what feels good. If a habit's a slog, we'll ditch it. He tells the story of a man who hated exercise but loved music. His fix? He only let himself listen to his favorite playlists while working out. Suddenly, the treadmill wasn't torture, it was a concert. The habit stuck because he'd bundled something dull with something he craved. Clear calls this temptation bundling, and it's genius. That dopamine hit from the music made the sweat worth it. Then there's the power of environment. Clear describes a woman, let's call her Lisa, who wanted to eat healthier. She didn't just willpower her way through it. She made her kitchen a temptation zone for good stuff. Bright bowls of fruit on the counter, veggies pre-chopped in the fridge, junk food shoved in a high cabinet. Over time, healthy eating felt irresistible because her space made it so. Clear's lesson here is clear: stack the deck in your favor. Make the habit seductive, and your brain will chase it. Law 3. Make it easy. Now we hit the third law: make it easy. Clear argues that the harder a habit is, the less likely it'll stick. Simplicity is king. He introduces the 2-minute rule. Scale any habit down to 2 minutes. Want to run? Start with tying your shoes. Want to read? Open a book for 2 minutes. He shares the story of a guy who wanted to get fit, but loathed the gym. His solution? Drive there, stay for 2 minutes, then leave. Crazy, right? But after a week, he lingered for 5 minutes. Then 10. Soon, he was lifting weights for an hour. Why? Because starting was so easy, he couldn't say no. Clear also talks about reducing friction. He tells of a woman who wanted to cook more. Her kitchen was a mess, pots buried, spices lost. So, she made it easy. She organized everything: pans on a rack, ingredients front and center. Cooking went from a hassle to a breeze, and she started whipping up meals nightly. Clear's takeaway: don't fight resistance, remove it. Make the habit so simple you can't fail, and the rest falls into place. Law 4. Make it satisfying. Finally, the fourth law: make it satisfying. Clear says we stick with habits that feel rewarding, right away, not years from now. He shares the story of a couple who wanted to save money. Big goals like retire early felt too distant, so they gamified it. Every time they skipped a takeout meal, they dropped the cash they'd have spent into a jar labeled Dream Vacation. Seeing that jar fill up was instant gratification. Months later, they had enough for a trip and a savings habit that stuck. The reward made it satisfying. Clear also loves trackers for this. He mentions a man who wanted to write daily. He hung a calendar on his wall and put a big red X on every day he wrote. That X wasn't just a mark, it was a win. The chain grew, and he couldn't bear to break it. Clear calls this the Seinfeld strategy, after comedian Jerry Seinfeld, who reportedly used it to write jokes. The satisfaction of not breaking the streak kept him going. Clear's point: tie a habit to a quick, tangible reward, and you'll crave the next round. Putting it all together, let's see these laws in action with one more story from the book. Imagine a woman, let's call her Emily, who wanted to start journaling. She'd tried before, but it always fizzled. This time, she used the 4 laws. First, she made it obvious. She left her journal on her nightstand, pen clipped to the page. Second, she made it attractive. She paired it with her favorite herbal tea, turning it into a cozy ritual. Third, she made it easy. She committed to just 1 sentence a night. No pressure, no fuss. Fourth, she made it satisfying. She stuck a gold star on each entry, silly but delightful. At first, it was just a sentence. But the cues triggered her, the tea lured her, the ease kept her going, and the stars cheered her on. A year later, Emily had a stack of journals, and a habit she loved. Clear uses stories like this to show us the 4 laws aren't separate tricks. They're a system. Weave them together, and habits don't just form, they thrive. The flip side: breaking bad habits. Clear doesn't stop with building habits. He flips the laws to break bad ones too. Take a guy addicted to his phone. To kill the habit, he inverted the laws. Make it invisible. He stashed his phone in a drawer. Make it unattractive. He turned it grayscale, draining the fun. Make it hard. He logged out of apps, adding steps. Make it unsatisfying. He tracked wasted hours, facing the cost. The compound effect of these tweaks? His screen time plummeted. Clear's insight here is brilliant. The same rules that build can dismantle. It's all about flipping the script. Why it works. So why do these 4 laws matter? Clear ties them to how our brains are wired. Obvious cues grab our attention. Attractive rewards spark our desire. Easy actions dodge our laziness. Satisfying outcomes lock it in. He backs this with science, the habit loop of cue, craving, response, reward, but he keeps it human with stories. Like the British cycling team he mentions, who used tiny tweaks, better seats, better sleep, to dominate. Or the everyday folks, like Jake, Lisa, and Emily, who turn small shifts into big wins. The laws work because they meet us where we are, not where we wish we were. As we wrap up, think about your own habits. What's one you'd love to build? Picture it through the 4 laws. Where's your cue? How can you make it sing to you? Shrink it down, make it laughably easy. Then, sprinkle a little joy on top. James Clear's Atomic Habits isn't about willpower, it's about design. The 4 laws of behavior change are your tools to craft a life, one small habit at a time. 4. The importance of tracking and monitoring habits. The book emphasizes the importance of tracking and monitoring habits in order to understand and change them. Imagine you're planting a garden. You scatter seeds, water them, and hope for the best. But here's the catch, you never check on them. No peeking at the soil, no measuring the sprouts, just blind faith. How do you think that garden would turn out? Probably a mess of weeds and wishful thinking. In Atomic Habits, James Clear tells us habits are like that garden. If you want them to grow, you can't just set them and forget them. You've got to track them, monitor them, watch them take shape. Today, we're digging into one of his key ideas, the importance of tracking and monitoring habits. Through stories and examples from the book, we'll see how keeping score doesn't just keep us honest, it turns small actions into lasting change. Let's dive in. Let's start with a simple truth Clear lays out. What gets measured gets managed. He borrows this from the business world, but he makes it personal. Take the story of a guy, let's call him Mark, who wanted to cut back on late-night TV. Mark wasn't even sure how bad it was, just that he felt groggy every morning. So he started tracking. Every night, he jotted down what time he turned off the screen. At first, it was shocking. 11 p.m. turned into midnight, then 1 a.m. on a bad night. But seeing those numbers in black and white lit a fire. He set a goal, lights out by 10:30, and tracked every day. Within weeks, he was in bed earlier, waking up sharp. Why? Tracking made the invisible visible. Clear says that's the power. You can't fix what you don't see. Now, let's talk about one of Clear's favorite tools, the habit tracker. He calls it a game changer, and he's got a story to prove it. Picture a woman, let's call her Sarah, who wanted to read more. She'd always loved books, but life kept getting in the way. So, she hung a calendar on her wall and made a rule. Every day she read, even just a page, she'd mark an X. Day 1, X. Day 2, X. At first, it was just a little ritual. But then something clicked. Those X's started chaining together. 3 days, a week, a month. She couldn't stand to break the streak. By year's end, she'd read 15 books. Not because she forced it, but because tracking turned it into a game she wanted to win. Clear nods to this as the Seinfeld strategy, inspired by Jerry Seinfeld's trick for writing jokes. Don't break the chain, and the habit grows. Clear takes this deeper with a concept he calls the plateau of latent potential. He says habits often feel like nothing's happening, until they do. Tracking bridges that gap. He uses a metaphor. Imagine heating an ice cube. You crank the heat from 25 degrees Fahrenheit to 31 degrees Fahrenheit, nothing melts. But hit 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's water in seconds. Habits are the same. The early days of tracking might not show much. Excess on a calendar, numbers in a log, but they're building heat. He shares the example of a man who wanted to lose weight. Every day, he stepped on the scale and wrote it down. For weeks, the needle barely budged. Frustrating, right? But he kept tracking meals, steps, weigh-ins. Then, 1 month, it dropped 5 pounds, then 10. The tracking didn't make the change. It revealed the progress he'd been stacking all along. Let's see this in action with another story. Clear tells us about a guy, let's call him Ben, who wanted to save money. Ben wasn't broke, but he never had cash left at month's end. So he started a simple tracker. Every purchase, logged in a notebook. Coffee, for dollars. Lunch, $12. That impulse gadget on Amazon, $30. At first, it was just data. But as the pages filled, patterns jumped out. He was blowing $50 a week on takeout he didn't even enjoy. Seeing it laid bare pushed him to cook more, and track that too. A year later, he'd saved thousands. Clear loves this because it shows how tracking doesn't just measure, it motivates. It's a mirror, reflecting what you're really doing, not what you think you're doing. Here's where Clear gets practical. He says tracking keeps you honest, but it also makes habits satisfying. One of his 4 laws of behavior change. He shares the story of a woman who wanted to exercise. She downloaded an app and logged every workout, 10 minutes of yoga, a walk, anything. Each entry buzzed her phone with a little, good job, animation. Silly, maybe, but it worked. That tiny reward kept her coming back. Months later, she was fitter than ever, all because tracking turned effort into a pat on the back. Clear's point. We stick with what feels good, and tracking delivers that hit, whether it's a check mark, a beep, or a gold star. But it's not all rosy. Clear warns us, tracking can backfire if you obsess. He tells of a guy who tracked his diet so hard, he weighed every almond, every grape. It worked, until it didn't. He burned out, ditched the scale, and binged. Clear's lesson here is balance. Tracking should simplify, not strangle. He suggests keeping it light, like Sarah's Excess or Ben's Notebook. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. Done right, it's a compass, not a cage. Let's zoom out with a bigger example Clear mentions. Benjamin Franklin. Yep, the founding father was a habit-tracking pioneer. Franklin kept a little book with 13 virtues, like temperance and industry, and every day, he marked where he succeeded or slipped. A black dot for a miss, a clean slate for a win. He didn't nail it every day. Franklin loved his wine a bit too much, but over years, those dots shaped him into a legend. Clear uses this to show how tracking isn't new. It's timeless. It's about holding yourself accountable, one day at a time, until the habit's part of you. Tracking also shines a light on the bad stuff. Clear shares the story of a woman, let's call her Laura, who couldn't stop scrolling social media. She installed an app to monitor her screen time. Day 1, for hours. Day 2, 5. The numbers horrified her. So, she set a limit and tracked it daily, down to 3 hours, then 2. The habit shrank because she couldn't ignore it anymore. Clear says this is key. Tracking bad habits makes them harder to hide. It's like turning on the lights in a messy room. You've got to deal with it. Let's tie this together with one last story. Imagine a guy, let's call him Alex, who wanted to write a novel. Big dream, right? He started small, 100 words a day, tracked in a spreadsheet. Some days, he hit 101. Others, 300. Every entry got a green highlight. At first, it was just a trickle, 3,000 words in a month. But he kept logging, watching the greens stack up. A year later, he had 50,000 words, a rough draft. Tracking didn't write the book, it kept him showing up. Clear loves this because it's so human. Alex didn't need genius, he needed consistency, and tracking gave him that. So why does tracking matter? Clear says it's about feedback. Habits are guesses at first. Will this work? Tracking turns guesses into data. It shows you what's sticking, what's slipping, and where to tweak. Like Mark's TV log, Sarah's Excess, or Laura's screen time. It's a tool to see yourself clearly. And when you see, you act. Clear ties this to his bigger picture. Habits compound. Tracking makes sure they compound in the right direction. As we close, think about your own habits. What's one you track? Grab a notebook, an app, a calendar, doesn't matter. Mark an X, log a number, watch it grow. James Clear's Atomic Habits isn't about grand leaps. It's about small steps, counted and kept. Tracking and monitoring aren't sexy, but they're the quiet engine of change. Start today, and let the record show who you're becoming. 5. How to create an implementation intention. Clear provides guidance on how to create an implementation intention, which involves specifying when and where a habit will be performed. Imagine you're standing at the starting line of a race. The gun's about to go off, and you've got one job, run. But there's a catch. You don't know when to start, where to turn, or how to pace yourself. You're just hoping it all works out. Sounds chaotic, right? That's what building habits can feel like without a plan. In Atomic Habits, James Clear hands us a tool to cut through that chaos, the implementation intention. It's a fancy term for a simple idea, deciding exactly when, where, and how you'll act. Today, we're unpacking how to create an implementation intention with stories and examples from the book that show it in action. By the end, you'll have a blueprint to turn vague wishes into rock-solid habits. Let's hit the ground running. First, let's get the basics. Clear defines an implementation intention as a specific plan. I will behavior, at time, in location. It's not, I'll exercise more, or I'll read someday. It's precise, like a meeting on your calendar. Why does this work? Clear says vague goals get lost in the shuffle of life. An implementation intention nails them down. He shares a study to back it up. People who wrote down when and where they'd vote were way more likely to show up than those who just intended to. The plan didn't make them care more, it made them act. Clear wants us to see this. Habits don't stick by accident. They stick by design. Let's bring this to life with a story from the book. Picture a woman, let's call her Anna, who wanted to start meditating. She'd tried before, but I'll meditate sometime always turned into never. So, she crafted an implementation intention. I will meditate for 5 minutes at 7 a.m. in my living room. No wiggle room, no excuses. The next morning, 7 a.m. rolled around, and there she was, cross-legged on the rug, breathing deep. At first, it felt mechanical. But day after day, that specific plan became her cue. Within a month, meditation was as automatic as brushing her teeth. Clear loves this because it shows how an implementation intention takes the guesswork out. Anna didn't have to decide. She just followed the script. Clear ties this to a strategy he calls habit stacking. The idea? Link your new habit to something you already do. He shares the example of a guy, let's call him Tom, who wanted to stretch every day. Tom didn't just say, I'll stretch. He stacked it. I will stretch for 2 minutes right after I brush my teeth at night in the bathroom. Brushing was his trigger, a habit already locked in. So, every night, toothbrush down, stretch on. The plan was so clear, time, place, sequence, that skipping felt harder than doing it. Months later, Tom was limber as ever, all because he piggybacked on a routine he wouldn't miss. Clear's point. An implementation intention doesn't just set a goal, it hooks it to your life. Now, let's see this in a bigger way. Clear tells the story of a man who wanted to save money. Big goals like build a nest egg felt overwhelming, so he got specific. I will transfer $50 to my savings account every Friday at 6 p.m. in my home office. Friday night, clock hits 6, he's at his desk, clicking transfer. It wasn't much, $50 a week, but it was crystal clear. No debating, no delaying. A year later, he had over $2,500 saved, not from willpower, but from a plan he couldn't ignore. Clear says this is the magic. An implementation intention turns intention into action by locking in the details. It's like programming a robot. You, the habit robot. Here's where Clear gets practical. He suggests starting small to make it stick. Take the example of a woman. Let's call her Lisa, who wanted to read more. She didn't aim for a novel a week. Her implementation intention was, I will read 1 page at 8 p.m. on my couch. 1 page. So tiny it was laughable. But 8 p.m. hit. She grabbed her book and read. Some nights, 1 page became 10. Others, she stopped at 1. Either way, she did it, because the when, where, and how were set in stone. Clear loves this because it proves you don't need grand plans, just clear ones. Lisa's habit grew not from ambition, but from precision. Let's flip it to breaking a bad habit. Clear says implementation intentions work here too. Just invert them. He shares the story of a guy, let's call him Mike, who couldn't stop checking his phone at dinner. His fix? I will put my phone in the kitchen drawer at 6 p.m. in my house. Not, I'll use it less. A specific action, time, and place. Dinner time came. Phone went in the drawer, and he was present with his family. The plan didn't kill the urge, but it broke the cycle. Over weeks, the habit faded. Clear's insight. An implementation intention can redirect you away from the bad, toward the good, by giving your brain a new script. Clear also shows how this scales up. He mentions a study of people trying to exercise. One group just got motivated, pumped up with pep talks. Another group made a plan. I will exercise for 20 minutes at 5 p.m. at the gym on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Guess who showed up? The planners. Over 90% of them stuck with it, while the motivated group floundered. Why? The implementation intention removed the should I moment. Clear uses this to hammer home a truth. Motivation fades, but a plan endures. It's not about feeling ready, it's about being ready. Let's get personal with one more example. Clear describes a friend. Let's call her Emily, who wanted to journal. She'd bought fancy notebooks, but they stayed blank. So, she tried this. I will write 1 sentence at 9 p.m. in my bedroom. Small, specific, scheduled. Night 1, she scribbled a line about her day. Night 2, same thing. Sometimes it was just, I'm tired, but she wrote. The plan was so tight, time and place locked, that skipping felt weirder than doing it. A year later, she had a stack of thoughts, all from that one clear intention. Clear says this is the beauty. It's not the size of the step, it's the clarity. Emily didn't need discipline, she needed direction. So how do you create your own? Clear breaks it down. Pick a habit, then answer when, where, and how. Want to walk more? I will walk for 10 minutes at 7 a.m. around my block. Want to cut sugar? I will drink water instead of soda at lunch in the kitchen. He even suggests writing it down. Studies show it boosts follow-through. The key is specificity. Vague stays a dream. Precise becomes a done deal. Clear ties this to his 4 laws. Make it obvious, attractive, easy, satisfying. But the implementation intention is the glue. It's the when and where that make the what happen. Let's zoom out. Why does this matter? Clear says life is chaos, distractions, decisions, fatigue. An implementation intention cuts through that noise. It's a pre-commitment, a promise to yourself that doesn't rely on willpower. Like Anna's meditation, Tom's stretching, or Mike's phone fix, it's a tiny contract that pays big dividends. Clear's not asking you to overhaul your life, just to plan one small move. Do it, repeat it, and watch it grow. 6. The role of identity in shaping habits. The book discusses the role of identity in shaping habits and how changing our habits can, in turn, change our identity. Imagine you're standing in front of a mirror, staring at your reflection. Who do you see? A runner? A writer? Someone who's always late. Now, what if that reflection wasn't just a snapshot? What if it was a blueprint? In Atomic Habits, James Clear argues that the most powerful way to change your habits isn't to chase goals or grit your teeth through willpower. It's to change who you think you are. Today, we're diving into one of his deepest insights, the role of identity in shaping habits. Through stories and examples from the book, we'll explore how the person you believe you are drives the habits you keep, and how shifting that belief can rewrite your life. Let's step into the mirror and see what's possible. Clear starts with a big idea. Habits aren't just about what you do, they're about who you become. He breaks change into 3 layers: outcomes, what you get; processes, what you do; and identity, who you are. Most of us focus on outcomes: lose 10 pounds, write a book, but Clear says that's backward. Real change starts with identity. Why? Because your habits flow from your self-image. If you see yourself as a couch potato, you'll act like one. But if you see yourself as a healthy person, you'll naturally gravitate toward habits that fit. Clear puts it simply: your behaviors are a reflection of your identity. What you do is a vote for the type of person you want to be. Let's see this in action with a story from the book. Picture a guy, let's call him Sam, who wanted to quit smoking. He tried a dozen times, always framing it as, "I'm trying to quit." One day, someone offered him a cigarette, and instead of saying, "No, I'm quitting," he said, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." Subtle shift, right? But it was huge. Sam wasn't just resisting a habit, he was rejecting an identity. Over time, that mindset stuck. He didn't have to fight the urge as hard because he didn't see himself as someone who smoked. Clear loves this example because it shows how identity flips the script. Sam's habit didn't change his identity changed his habit. Clear takes this further with a personal story. He tells us about his own journey after a brutal high school injury, a baseball bat to the face that left him relearning how to move. As he recovered, he didn't set out to be a star athlete again. Instead, he decided, "I'm the kind of person who doesn't miss workouts." That identity drove tiny habits, showing up to the gym, even for 10 minutes. At first, it was just consistency, not brilliance. But those daily votes, those workouts, built a new self-image. Years later, he was fit, strong, and writing a bestseller. Clear's point: he didn't chase a goal. He built an identity, and the habits followed like shadows. Now, let's meet someone else from the book, a woman, let's call her Rachel, who wanted to be a writer. Rachel didn't start by saying, "I'll write a novel." She told herself, "I'm a writer." That shift changed everything. She didn't wait for inspiration. Writers write, so she did. Her habit? A few sentences a day. Some were garbage, but that didn't matter. Each sentence was a vote for her writer identity. Over months, those votes piled up: pages, chapters, a manuscript. Clear uses this to show how identity isn't about perfection. It's about proof. Rachel became a writer by acting like one, and the habit stuck because it fit who she saw herself to be. Clear ties this to a cool concept: every habit casts a vote. Not every vote wins the election, just adds to the tally. He shares the story of a man, let's call him David, who wanted to get healthy. David didn't overhaul his life overnight. He started small. "I'm the kind of person who makes healthy choices." One day, that meant swapping soda for water. Another, taking the stairs. Each choice was a vote. Some days, he still ate junk. Old habits die hard, but the votes for healthy David kept stacking. Over a year, he'd lost 20 pounds, not from a diet, but from an identity that pulled him toward better habits. Clear's lesson? You don't have to be perfect. Just keep voting for the you want. Let's flip it to breaking a bad habit. Clear tells of a woman, let's call her Laura, who was always late. She hated it, but "I'm a late person" was her story. Then she decided, "I'm someone who's on time." That new identity needed habits to match, so she started small, setting her alarm 10 minutes earlier, packing her bag the night before. At first, she still rushed, but she kept at it. Each early arrival was a vote. Months later, she was the one waiting, not running. Clear says this is identity at work. Laura didn't just change her schedule, she changed her self-image, and her habits had to catch up. Here's where Clear gets practical. He suggests asking, what would identity do? Take a guy, let's call him Mike, who wanted to read more. He decided, "I'm a reader." So, when he had a spare minute, he'd ask, what would a reader do? Answer, pick up a book, not his phone. His habit became 1 page a day, tiny, but deliberate. Over time, that identity took root. He finished books, not because he had to, but because readers read. Clear loves this trick. It's a compass. When you're lost, tired, tempted, your identity points the way. Clear also warns us. Identity can trap us if we're not careful. He shares the story of a friend who was a hard worker. Great, until it meant never resting. Burnout hit because his habits served an old identity he'd outgrown. Clear's fix? Update the story. Decide who you want to be now, not who you were. Like Sam shedding smoker or Rachel claiming writer. It's a choice. Habits don't just reflect identity, they reshape it. Pick the right one, and the cycle turns upward. Let's zoom out with one last example. Clear mentions a study of people trying to exercise. Those who said, "I'm going to the gym," often flaked. But those who said, "I'm an athlete," showed up. Why? Athletes train, it's who they are. One woman in the group started with, "I'm an athlete," and her habit was a 10-minute walk. Small, but it fit. Walks became jogs, then gym sessions. Her identity didn't follow her habits. Her habits followed her identity. Clear says this is the secret. Start with who, not what, and the how falls into place. So how do you do it? Clear's advice is simple. Decide the type of person you want to be, then prove it with small wins. Want to be organized? I'm an organized person. Vote with a tidy desk. Want to be calm? I'm a calm person. Vote with a deep breath. Each action reinforces the story. It's not instant. Sam didn't quit smoking in a day. Rachel didn't write a book in a week. But it's steady. Clear ties this to his bigger picture. Habits compound. Identity is the root. Habits are the branches. As we close, look back at that mirror. Who do you want to see? James Clear's Atomic Habits isn't about forcing change. It's about becoming it. Pick an identity, runner, reader, whatever calls you. Cast a vote today, another tomorrow. The role of identity isn't to judge you. It's to guide you. Because in the end, the habits that last aren't the ones you do. They're the ones you are. 7. How to avoid the 2-minute rule. Clear introduces the 2-minute rule, which involves making the first step of a habit so easy that it takes less than 2 minutes to do. Picture this. You're staring down a big dream, running a marathon, writing a novel, mastering a new skill. It's exciting, but overwhelming. Where do you even start? In Atomic Habits, James Clear tosses us a lifeline, the 2-minute rule. It's a brilliantly simple trick. Shrink any habit to just 2 minutes to get the ball rolling. Tie your shoes. Write one sentence. Do a single stretch. But here's the twist. It's easy to misuse this rule, to start small and stay small, or to skip it altogether because it feels too trivial. Today, we're diving into how to use the 2-minute rule right and avoid the traps that keep it from working its magic. With stories and examples from the book, we'll see how to wield this tool to build habits that last. Let's take those first 2 minutes and run with them. First, let's unpack what the 2-minute rule is. Clear says it's about making habits so easy you can't say no. The point, he writes, is to master the habit of showing up. Want to read more? Start with 1 page, 2 minutes. Want to exercise? Just put on your workout clothes, 2 minutes. It's not the full habit, it's the gateway. But here's where people stumble. They either dismiss it as too small to matter, or they stop at the 2 minutes and never grow. Clear wants us to avoid both pitfalls. It's a launch pad, not a landing zone. To use it right, you've got to start and build, and he's got stories to show us how. Let's start with a classic example from the book. Imagine a guy, let's call him Chris, who wanted to get fit. Chris wasn't a gym guy. Sweat and weights felt like a foreign language. He'd tried jumping into hour-long workouts, but he'd burn out in days. So he tried the 2-minute rule. I'll go to the gym for 2 minutes. That's it. He'd drive there, walk in, do 1 push-up, and leave. Sounds ridiculous, right? At first, he felt silly. 2 minutes isn't a workout. But here's what he avoided: giving up. Those 2 minutes got him through the door. After a week, he stayed for 5, then 10. A year later, he was lifting regularly. Clear loves this because Chris didn't scoff at the small start. He used it. The trap he avoided? Thinking 2 minutes was too little to count. It counted because it started the engine. Clear ties this to a key idea. Habits are about consistency, not intensity. But people often misuse the rule by stopping short. Take a woman, let's call her Julia, who wanted to write a book. She heard about the 2-minute rule and set her bar low. I'll write for 2 minutes a day. Day 1, she scribbled a sentence. Day 2, same thing. It was easy, but after a month, she had a handful of lines, not a story. She'd avoided the trap of never starting, but she fell into another, staying stuck at 2 minutes. Clear says the rule's power is in momentum. Julia needed to stretch it, 2 minutes to 5, then 10, not settle for the minimum. The fix? Pair the rule with a plan to grow, like, after 2 weeks, I'll aim for a paragraph. Start small, but don't stay there. Now, let's see it work beautifully. Clear shares the story of a man, let's call him Ethan, who wanted to meditate. Ethan's days were chaos. Work, kids, no time for Zen. Big sessions felt impossible, so he went with, I'll meditate for 2 minutes after my morning coffee. 2 minutes, barely a breath. But every day, post-coffee, he'd sit, close his eyes, and breathe. He avoided the trap of overcomplicating it. No apps, no gurus, just 2 minutes. Over weeks, those minutes felt good, calm crept in. Soon, he stretched it to 5, then 10. A year later, he was a meditation regular. Clear's point. Ethan didn't dismiss the rule as not enough. He used it as a foothold. The pitfall he dodged? Letting ambition kill the start. 2 minutes was his bridge to more. Here's a flip side Clear warns about. Skipping the rule because it's too easy. He tells of a friend. Let's call her Mia, who wanted to run. Mia was a go big or go home type. When she heard start with 2 minutes, she rolled her eyes. 2 minutes isn't running. It's a stroll. So, she laced up for a 5K right out the gate. Day 1, she ran, barely. Day 2, sore and miserable, she quit. Mia fell into the trap of rejecting the 2-minute rule as beneath her. Clear says that's the mistake. Overreaching kills habits before they form. If Mia had started with, I'll run for 2 minutes around the block, she'd have built the habit first, then the distance. The fix? Swallow your pride. Small isn't weak, it's smart. Let's get practical with another example. Clear describes a woman, let's call her Sarah, who wanted to eat healthier. She didn't overhaul her fridge. She used the 2-minute rule. I'll chop 1 vegetable after dinner. 2 minutes, knife, carrot, done. She avoided the trap of doing nothing. Big diet plans had always crashed. At first, it was just a pile of carrots. But those 2 minutes sparked more. She'd toss them in a pan, add a spice. Soon, she was cooking veggie sides nightly. The pitfall she dodged? Thinking 2 minutes couldn't lead to real change. Clear says it can, it's the spark. Sarah's success was in starting tiny and letting it grow naturally, not forcing a leap she'd abandon. Clear also shows how to avoid misusing the rule with bad habits. Take a guy, let's call him Nate, who scrolled his phone too much. He flipped the 2-minute rule. I'll put my phone in another room for 2 minutes after work. Simple, right? But he hit a snag. He'd grab it back too soon, stuck at the 2-minute mark. The trap? Not building on it. Clear suggests stacking. After a week, make it 5 minutes, then 10. Nate eventually did. 2 minutes became my rule. Then I'd leave it there till dinner. Screen time shrank because he avoided settling for the minimum. The lesson? Use the rule to start breaking a habit, then push the boundary. So how do you avoid screwing up the 2-minute rule? Clear's got a playbook. First, don't skip it. Chris and Ethan prove it works when you start small. Second, don't stall there. Julia's story shows you've got to nudge it forward. Third, don't scoff at it. Mia's flop is a warning. He ties this to his bigger system. Make it easy. Law 3 of behavior change. 2 minutes lowers the bar so you show up. But showing up's just step 1. Growth is step 2. Clear use is a metaphor. It's like planting a seed. 2 minutes gets it in the ground. Consistency waters it. Avoid the trap of pulling it up to check the roots. Let it sprout. Let's wrap with one more story. Clear mentions a guy, let's call him Alex, who wanted to learn guitar. Big dreams of solos, but no skill. His 2-minute rule. I'll practice 2 minutes after breakfast. Day 1, he strummed a chord, badly. He avoided quitting by keeping it short. But he also avoided stalling. After a month, he bumped it to 5 minutes, then 10. A year later, he could play songs. Clear loves this. Alex didn't mock the 2 minutes, and he didn't stop there. He built an identity. Guitar player, one small strum at a time. The rule wasn't the habit, it was the door. 8. The importance of celebrating small wins. The book emphasizes the importance of celebrating small wins, which can help to build motivation and reinforce new habits. Imagine you're climbing a mountain. The peak's miles above, shrouded in clouds, and every step feels like a slog. Now, what if you paused, just for a second, to look back at the ground you've gained? A little cheer, a fist pump, a hey, I did that. Suddenly, the next step doesn't feel so heavy. In Atomic Habits, James Clear tells us that's the secret to sticking with habits, celebrating small wins. It's not about waiting for the big prize. It's about savoring the tiny victories along the way. Today, we're diving into why those moments matter, with stories and examples from the book that show how a pat on the back can turn a shaky start into a lasting habit. Let's raise a glass to the little things. Clear kicks off with a core truth. Humans are wired for instant gratification. We chase dopamine, that feel-good spark, and habits that don't deliver it fast often fizzle. Big goals like lose 20 pounds or write a book are great, but they're far off. Small wins, though, they're right now. Clear ties this to his 4th law of behavior change. Make it satisfying. Celebrating a small win flips a switch in your brain. It says, this feels good, let's do it again. Without that, habits feel like a chore. With it, they become a game. And Clear's got stories to prove it works. Let's start with a simple example from the book. Picture a guy, let's call him Tom, who wanted to save money. Tom wasn't rich, every dollar counted, but retire early felt like a pipe dream. So he started small, skipping one coffee shop latte a week and putting that $5 in a jar. Here's the key. Every time he dropped in that bill, he'd grin and say, "Nice one, Tom." A tiny celebration, just a moment, but it lit him up. That $5 wasn't much, but the ritual was everything. Over months, the jar filled, $50, $100, and the habit stuck. Why? Clear says it's the joy. Tom didn't wait for millions. He celebrated the fives. That small win kept him coming back. Clear takes this further with a concept he calls the habit loop. Cue, craving, response, reward. The reward seals the deal. He shares the story of a woman, let's call her Emily, who wanted to exercise. She hated gyms, but she loved her dog. So, she made a plan. Walk the dog for 10 minutes after work. After each walk, she'd give herself a little cheer. "Way to go, Em." And toss her pup a treat. That double reward, her smile, the dog's wag, made it click. At first, 10 minutes was a slog. But those celebrations piled up, and soon she was walking longer, feeling stronger. Clear's point. Emily didn't just build a habit. She made it fun. Celebrating small wins turned a duty into a delight. Now, let's see it in a different light. Clear tells of a man, let's call him Jake, who wanted to read more. Jake wasn't a bookworm. Scrolling his phone was easier. He started tiny, 1 page a night. After each page, he'd mark it with a check on a calendar and whisper, "Got it." That check wasn't just a mark, it was a win. Some nights, he'd stop there. Others, he'd keep going. But every check fueled him. A year later, he'd read 20 books. Not because he forced it, but because those small celebrations kept the fire alive. Clear ties this to momentum. Celebrating a win, even a page, tells your brain, this is worth it. Jake avoided the trap of waiting for a bookshelf. He cheered the steps. Here's where Clear gets clever. Celebrations don't have to be big. He shares the story of a woman, let's call her Sarah, who wanted to eat healthier. She didn't overhaul her diet, just swapped one soda for water each day. After every glass, she'd do a little dance in her kitchen, 2 seconds of goofy joy. Silly? Sure. Effective? Absolutely. That dance was her win, her reward. Over weeks, 1 water became 2, then soda faded out. Why? Clear says small wins, celebrated, compound. Sarah didn't need a parade, she needed a spark. The pitfall she dodged? Letting the habit feel like punishment. That dance made it hers. Clear also shows how this works for breaking bad habits. Take a guy, let's call him Nate, who wanted to cut screen time. He set a rule, no phone after 8 p.m. Each night he pulled it off, he'd fist bump the air and say, "Nailed it." That tiny gesture flipped the script. Less scrolling wasn't a loss, it was a victory. At first, he slipped. Old habits cling, but those fist bumps stacked up. Months later, he was reading or chatting instead of staring at a screen. Clear's insight. Celebrating small wins reframes the struggle. Nate didn't mourn his phone. He cheered his freedom. The reward kept him hooked. Let's zoom out with a bigger example. Clear nods to the British cycling team. Those underdogs turned champs. When Dave Brailsford took over, he didn't just tweak bikes and diets. He built a culture of small wins. A faster lap, high fives, a better sleep, cheers. Every rider tracked their gains, and every gain got a nod. Those celebrations weren't fluff, they fueled belief. By 2008, they dominated the Olympics, all from stacking tiny victories. Clear loves this. It's not the win itself, it's the feeling. Celebrating kept them hungry. They avoided the trap of chasing only gold, they savored the grind. So why do small wins matter? Clear says they bridge the gap between effort and payoff. Big goals are slow, small wins are now. He uses a metaphor. Habits are like a savings account. Each deposit's small, but the interest compounds. Skip the celebration, and you're less likely to deposit again. He shares the story of a woman, let's call her Lisa, who wanted to journal. She started with 1 sentence a night. After each line, she'd stick a gold star on the page. Kid stuff, but it worked. That star was her win. Soon, sentences became paragraphs. A year later, she had a journal stack. Clear's lesson? Lisa didn't wait for a memoir. She celebrated the scribbles. That kept her pen moving. Clear warns us, though, don't overdo it. He tells of a guy who went wild. Big rewards for tiny habits, like a dessert for every workout. It backfired. Habits became bribes, not wins. Clear's fix? Keep it proportional. A smile, a checkmark, a yes. Enough to feel good, not derail. The goal is satisfaction, not sabotage. Lisa's stars, Tom's grin, small, sustainable. Avoid the trap of chasing the reward over the habit itself. Let's tie it together with one last story. Imagine a guy, let's call him Alex, who wanted to learn guitar. He started with 2 minutes of practice, chords that sounded like noise. After each session, he'd tap his foot and say, "Progress." That little beat was his win. Some days, he'd play longer, others, he'd stop. But every progress pulled him back. A year later, he could strum a tune, not a rock star, but a player. Clear says this is the magic. Celebrating small wins builds identity. Alex didn't just practice, he became a guitarist, one cheer at a time. As we close, think about your habits. Pick one: walking, writing, whatever. Do it small, then celebrate. Dance, check it off, whisper nice. James Clear's Atomic Habits isn't about the finish line, it's about the steps. Small wins aren't just progress, they're fuel. Avoid waiting for the peak, cheer the climb. Because in the end, the habits that stick aren't the ones you force, they're the ones you enjoy. 9. How to create a habit stack. Clear provides guidance on how to create a habit stack, which involves building new habits onto existing ones. Imagine your day as a row of dominoes, lined up and ready to fall. You tip one, just one, and the rest tumble in perfect order, each triggering the next. What if your habits could work like that? In Atomic Habits, James Clear hands us a tool to make it happen: habit stacking. It's a simple, clever way to build new habits by linking them to the ones you already have. No willpower battles, no forgetting, just a chain reaction of small wins. Today, we're diving into how to create a habit stack, with stories and examples from the book that bring it to life. By the end, you'll know how to string your habits together like a pro. Let's knock over that first domino. First, let's get the gist. Clear describes habit stacking as piggybacking a new habit onto an existing one. You take something you already do, brush your teeth, make coffee, check your phone, and tack on something new. The formula is straightforward. After current habit, I will new habit. Why does it work? Clear says it's about cues. Your daily routines are full of them, little triggers that spark action. Habit stacking uses those cues like hooks, hanging new behaviors where they can't be missed. It's not about reinventing your day. It's about weaving habits into the fabric you've already got. Let's see it in action with a story from the book. Picture a woman. Let's call her Sarah, who wanted to meditate. Sarah wasn't a Zen master. Her mind raced, and sitting still felt alien. She tried meditating sometime, but it never stuck. Then she tried habit stacking. After I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate for 1 minute. Coffee was her rock. Every day, 7 a.m., no fail. So, pour the brew, sip, then sit, 1 minute of calm. At first, it was shaky, thoughts everywhere, but the stack held. Coffee became her cue, and meditation tagged along. Months later, she was up to 5 minutes, then 10. Clear loves this. Sarah didn't force it. She hooked it to a habit she wouldn't skip. The stack made it automatic. Clear takes this further with a personal example. He wanted to do push-ups, nothing crazy, just a fitness boost. His stack? After I brush my teeth at night, I will do 10 push-ups. Brushing was locked in, twice a day, like clockwork. So, toothbrush down, he'd drop and give 10. Early days, it was a grunt. 10 felt like 50. But the cue was so strong he couldn't dodge it. Over weeks, 10 became easy, then 20. Clear says this is the power. Habit stacking leans on what's already solid. He didn't need a gym or a pep talk, just a trigger. The stack turned a wish into a reflex. Now, let's try something practical. Clear shares the story of a guy, let's call him Mike, who wanted to read more. Mike loved books but always scrolled his phone instead. His stack: after I sit down with my evening tea, I will read 1 page. Tea was his wind down. Every night, 8 p.m., steaming mug in hand. So sit, sip, read, 1 page. Some nights, he stopped there. Others, he kept going. But that 1 page was non-negotiable, tied to the tea. A year later, he'd finished 15 books. Clear's point: Mike didn't overhaul his nights. He stacked reading onto a ritual. The cue did the heavy lifting. Here's where it gets fun. Clear suggests stacking multiple habits. Take a woman. Let's call her Lisa, who wanted to get organized. She built a morning chain. After I make my bed, I will write my to-do list. After I write my to-do list, I will drink a glass of water. Bed making was her anchor. Every day, first thing. So, bed made, list written, water downed, all before breakfast. At first, it felt clunky, 3 steps in a row. But the stack clicked. She avoided chaos because each habit triggered the next. Clear says this is habit stacking superpower. It's a domino run. Lisa's mornings became a system, not a scramble. Let's flip it to breaking a habit. Clear tells of a guy, let's call him Nate, who wanted to cut phone time. His stack. After I finish dinner, I will put my phone in a drawer. Dinner was his cue. Every night, 6:30, plates cleared. So meal done, phone gone. He'd linger at the table, chat, or read instead. The stack broke the scroll cycle. Nate avoided the trap of vague, less phone promises. He tied it to a moment. Clear's insight. Stacking works both ways, build good, ditch bad. Nate's drawer habit stuck because it rode dinner's coattails. Clear also shows how to stack for big goals. He mentions a man, let's call him Tom, who wanted to exercise. Tom's stack. After I drop my kids at school, I will walk for 10 minutes. School drop-off was daily, 8 a.m., rain or shine. So, kids out, he'd walk, around the block, nothing fancy. He avoided skipping because the cue was baked in. 10 minutes grew to 20, then a jog. A year later, he was fitter than ever. Clear loves this. Tom didn't wait for motivation. He stacked it onto life. The habit grew because the trigger never faltered. So how do you create your own habit stack? Clear's recipe is simple. Step 1. List your current habits. Coffee, shower, commute, anything routine. Step 2. Pick a new habit, stretch, journal, whatever. Step 3. Match them up. After this, I will that. He suggests writing it down. After I start the dishwasher, I will do 5 squats. Start small, 2 minutes, 1 rep, then test it. The key? Pick a cue you won't miss. Clear ties this to his first law. Make it obvious. Stacking makes the when crystal clear. Let's see it fail and fix it. Imagine a woman. Let's call her Emily, who wanted to stretch. Her stack. After I wake up, I will stretch for 5 minutes. Sounds good, but wake up was vague. Some days 6 a.m., others 8. She'd roll out of bed, distracted, and skip it. The trap? A weak cue. Clear's fix. Tighten it. Emily switched to. After I turn off my alarm, I will stretch for 2 minutes. Alarm off. Every day, same sound, same spot. That stack stuck. Clear says specificity is king. Vague cues crumble, sharp ones hold. One last story. Clear describes a friend. Let's call him Alex, who wanted to save money. His stack. After I pay my rent, I will transfer $25 to savings. Rent was monthly. First of the month, no exceptions. So, payment sent, $25 saved. It wasn't much, but it stacked. $300 in a year, then more. Alex avoided the I'll save later trap by linking it to a must-do. Clear's lesson? Habit stacking turns random goals into rhythms. Alex's savings grew because the cue was ironclad. 10. The importance of being patient and persistent. The book concludes by emphasizing the importance of being patient and persistent when trying to change habits, as it can take time and effort to see results. Imagine you're digging for treasure. You've got a map, a shovel, and a spot marked X. You start, spadeful after spadeful, but after an hour, there's no gold, just dirt. Do you quit? Or do you keep going, trusting the map? In Atomic Habits, James Clear says building habits is like that dig. It's not about instant riches. It's about patience and persistence, the quiet grit to keep shoveling when the payoff's out of sight. Today, we're exploring why sticking with it matters, with stories and examples from the book that show how slow, steady effort turns small habits into big wins. Grab your shovel. Let's unearth the power of hanging in there. Clear starts with a truth we often dodge. Real change takes time. He calls it the plateau of latent potential, that frustrating stretch where you're working hard but seeing zilch. It's why diets flop, gyms empty out, and resolutions fade. But here's the kicker. Those early efforts aren't wasted. They're stacking up just below the surface. Clear says patience and persistence are what get you past the plateau to the breakthrough. It's not glamorous, it's grind. And he's got stories to prove it's worth it. Let's begin with a vivid example from the book, the British cycling team. Back in the early 2000s, they were a joke. No Tour de France wins, no Olympic glory, just decades of dust. Then Dave Brailsford took over. He didn't promise quick fixes, just tiny tweaks, 1% better every day. New seats, better sleep, hand washing to dodge colds. Months passed, nothing flashy. Years ticked by, still no headlines. But they kept at it. By 2008, they swept the Beijing Olympics. By 2012, they won the Tour de France, then 4 more times. Clear loves this. Patience and persistence turned losers into legends. They didn't quit when the wins were slow, they trusted the process. Now, let's bring it closer. Clear tells of a guy, let's call him Mike, who wanted to lose weight. Mike wasn't fit. Years of fast food had piled on the pounds. He didn't crash diet. He started small, walked 10 minutes a day. Week 1, no change. Week 2, same. The scale mocked him, but he kept walking. A month in, a pound dropped. Then 2. A year later, he was 30 pounds lighter. Why? Clear says it's the compound effect. Small habits, patiently repeated, snowball. Mike avoided the trap of giving up when the mirror didn't cheer. Persistence paid off, one step at a time. Clear gives us a metaphor to grab onto: bamboo. Plant it, and for years, 4, 5, nothing breaks the soil. You water, you wait, you wonder. Then, in year 5, it explodes, 90 feet in 6 weeks. That's habits, he says. The early days are root building, invisible, unglamorous. Quit there, and you miss the growth. He shares the story of a woman, let's call her Sarah, who wanted to write a book. She wrote 1 page a day. Months passed, barely a chapter. Friends asked, why bother? But she persisted. 2 years later, she had a manuscript. Clear's point. Sarah didn't see shoots right away. She trusted the roots. Patience won. Here's where it gets real. Clear admits persistence isn't easy. Life throws curveballs. He tells of a man, let's call him Tom, who wanted to meditate. Tom's days were mayhem, work, kids, chaos. He started with 1 minute a day. Some days, he forgot. Others, he zoned out. Progress? Nada. But he stuck with it. Reset, retry. 6 months in, 1 minute became 5. A year later, he was calm, focused, a meditator. Clear says this is key. Persistence isn't perfection, it's showing up. Tom avoided bailing when the calm didn't come fast. He dug through the dirt. Let's flip it to breaking a habit. Clear shares the story of a woman. Let's call her Lisa, who smoked. She'd quit before. Cold turkey, big drama, quick relapse. This time, she went small, skip 1 cigarette a day. Days turned to weeks, no fireworks, just cravings. She slipped, smoked, started over. But she kept at it. A year in, she was down to none. Why? Clear says patience and persistence beat the rush. Lisa didn't expect instant freedom. She chipped away. The trap she dodged? Quitting when the urge lingered. Slow won the race. Clear ties this to his own life. After a high school injury, a baseball bat to the face, he had to rebuild. Walking was a win, then lifting light weights. Months of rehab showed little. Friends moved on. He limped. But he persisted. I'm the guy who doesn't miss workouts. Years later, he was strong, writing Atomic Habits. Clear says patience turned his setback into a story. He avoided the lure of quick fixes. Steady built the man. It's not about speed, it's about staying in the game. So why do patience and persistence matter? Clear uses science. Habits compound, but the curve is slow at first. He calls it the 1% better rule. Improve a tiny bit daily, and in a year, you're 37 times better. Rush it, and you crash. Stick it, and you soar. He shares the story of a guy, let's call him Nate, who wanted to save money. Nate started with $1 a day. A month, $1.30. A year, $3.65. Peanuts, right? But he kept going. 5 years. With interest, it was thousands. Clear's lesson? Nate didn't scoff at the dollar. He trusted time. Persistence stacked the coins. Clear warns us, though, impatience kills. He tells of a woman, let's call her Emily, who wanted to run. She laced up for a 5K, day 1, gasping, day 2 done. She bailed when the lungs didn't keep up. If she'd been patient, 2 minutes a day, building slow, she'd have legs by now. Clear's fix? Start small, stay long. Emily's trap was chasing the peak, not the plateau. Persistence needs patience to breathe. Let's wrap with one more tale. Imagine a guy, let's call him Alex, who wanted to learn guitar. He strummed 2 minutes a day, chords like cats fighting. Weeks in, no songs. Friends laugh, give up, man. But Alex persisted, I'm a guitarist. 2 minutes became 5, then 10. A year later, he played a tune. Clear loves this. Alex didn't need talent, he needed time. Patience let the notes form. Persistence kept the strings humming. The win wasn't instant, it was earned. As we close, picture your own X on the map. What habit are you digging for? Start small. 2 minutes, $1, 1 page. Be patient when the dirt flies. Be persistent when the shovel's heavy. James Clear's Atomic Habits isn't about fast, it's about far. The treasure's there, below the plateau. Keep digging, and you'll find it, one spadeful at a time. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and please remember to subscribe to receive notification of upcoming recordings. See you in next video.